what I'm seeing is a lot of people trying to jump on the bandwagon because they see something that looks or feels cool and they want to be looking or feeling cool as well too with everybody else, because a lot of their peers are saying you need to be doing this. So I think to start, what's happening is, with the same thing we just talked about with the data being more prevalent than ever, boards and C-suites have more data at their fingertips than ever as well too. And they're seeing what other companies are doing very similar to this via social media and everything else. And they're saying, this is cool. Why aren't we doing this?
Hello world, this is BetterTech, a podcast where we chat with some of the most successful leaders about the latest industry developments. So join us as we explore the world reliant on tech. This episode is brought to you by Tkxel, a leading software development company. Check them out at tkxel.com. We are joined today by Ryan Fay, Global Head of High Tech and Global Enterprises at Gartner, and Umair Javed, CEO Tkxel, to talk us through on how CIOs can be a real asset for the organization and how the role has evolved over time. So welcome Ryan and Umair, and let's get right to it.
Okay, Ryan, welcome for this podcast. I'm Umair. I'm from Tkxel. I'm the founder and CEO of Tkxel, and I work and talk to CIOs like you in order to find some information nuggets that we can share with our set of audience and see if we can find a value for them. So I hope this is going to be a good conversation, a great conversation with you. So let's start. If you're ready, we can start right now.
Yes, absolutely. Sounds good. Thanks for having me.
So it will be great if you can tell us a little bit about yourself, your career, your path, your progression, what you're doing these days, something in the past that will help the audience set up the context.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started in IT early on. My father was the president of a company called Avnet, and I started there at more of an internship, and essentially very young age went in there and started understanding supply chain, warehousing. And what I realized quickly through working in the warehouse is that technology was the hub of everything. You know, everything was connected through multiple different SKUs, and all the SKUs matched back to multiple different products. And I was kind of enamored by the way everything was connected to this central hub. So I decided to move away from the supply chain side.
It's essentially the highway of information, and the
exactly.
information is,
yeah, the highway of information, you know, and I wanted to get more involved on the highway and be able to figure out how we could be speeding down, into the future in this, revolution that I thought was going to be taking over the world in a way where you could scale supply chain to the next level, right? So I started there supply chain. I'm going to bring that up because my career kind of moved back to supply chain for blockchain aspects, and I'll talk about what we did there. But early in supply chain, then I moved to the IT side, networking, backgrounds in mechanical engineering, computer science. So what I loved about the aspects of technology that you could apply to multiple different business aspects, because I really love business. I love the actual scaling of the business itself. I love the way to do that through using technology to actually bring, network effect and economies of scale to scale the business more quickly. And then also what I thought was exciting was taking all that and putting it together to actually create a team, and having that team, which was essentially the byproduct of having great technology and a great company, great culture, to actually deliver really well to our clients. So
I was reading upon your profile. You program well, you lead teams well, you know, are a technologist, and you're a horologist as well. I mean, what's that part?
Yes. Yeah, I love watches. So it's something that just came on early on. Right now I'm wearing a Rolex 6541. So, it's a slightly rare Rolex Milgres, but it's funny actually you bring that up because we didn't talk about this before the conversation, but this was one of the first watches that was actually able to go into a lot of different electromagnetic areas. So something about watches, the way they're put together. So I started by first buying watches that were really cheap just because I didn't have any money. And then they were breaking on me, right? And I got into automatic watches. I started taking them apart, fixing them, and then I got really into watches, and I started buying watches that were way too expensive. But luckily, the watch market has done really well. So it's one of the things that has been a nice collection or hobby, to have.
As a CIO, I expect CIOs to really wear smart watches. So a CIO wearing a mechanical watch is still a rare thing, I guess, these days.
Yeah.
but yeah. So Ryan, it's all great stuff. And since you have looked at the supply chain, you've looked at the tech, I've been working with, my company works with a lot of companies of different sizes, of small, medium to all the way to Fortune 10. I mean, can you differentiate how a small, medium CIO, a CIO of a small, medium company differs from a CIO of a large company or an enterprise? How actually the role changes? I mean, how the expectation changes?
Yeah, absolutely. So the role of a CIO at a MSC or medium-sized enterprise, maybe even startup, right? What's going to be happening is going to be more day-to-day operations, more understanding of command and control of the teams, more back-end facilitation of actually understanding and maintaining and controlling the environment. Probably some networking aspects. Most likely, they're probably still programming to a certain level or extent, especially if you're this dual CIO CTO role. So I would say that is the level of where it's still really fun to be a CIO. And not that it's not fun to be a CIO as you move up in the organization, but I think that to me is like the equilibrium where you start seeing a really good return on your time of being a CIO, and there's an investment that you're making with the team, and you have a much bigger impact in a role, in a startup.
Is there still some a programmer, a tech geek hidden inside
Yes.
you while you're attending these board meetings and all that and making all these presentations?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I mean, in that role, most likely those folks are going to be still really talking more the tech language, but still translating it, obviously, because you got to be bilingual, but talking the most of the tech language to the team and then driving it from a technology perspective. But what's really fun about those companies is it's still normally not super established for the technology stack. So you're building, you're essentially, for lack of better words, you're piloting out a bunch of things as a team, and everyone's excited about technology because that's what's driving the revenue of your company.
So CIO versus CTO and other tech roles in the company, how do you really differentiate them, and what do you feel how they need to come together, or a single person should maybe knowing all of them? Because I've spoken to several CIOs, and they're largely more on the server infrastructure and all that side instead of more of a tech side. I was just looking at your profile, and you're like CIO, CTO combined into one. So just wanted to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so traditionally, exactly what you said, CIO would be on the back end side, more infrastructure, more cost management, more VMO, the vendor management side. CTO would be more on the app side, front facing, user interfaces. I think what's interesting is a lot of companies now are merging that to be more of a CDO, so chief digital officer, is kind of having both roles in one, especially for the smaller organizations. But what's happening in larger organizations, like Fortune 10s, for example, they're having multiple layers of folks report up to the CIO. The CIO is then less.
They have so many CIOs. There could be a CIO of CIOs, actually.
Yes, you have a global CIO, divisional CIO, regional CIO. So there's the CIOs of CIOs, and then there's the office of CIOs or CTOs. Yeah. So it becomes more of a fill in the gap word, CIO, and in those organizations. Other organizations, those might just be managers, right, depending on the level of organization. So what it comes down to, a few things. I think every organization is different. Every organization, different structure, different ability. And every organization is a different, aptitude for technology, or maybe a wherewithal for what they want to be able to execute on technology. So depending on the organizational sophistication or savviness of technology, that's also going to dictate what the CIO or CTO role is doing, or maybe a merging of the roles together as well.
Right. So, the CIO role, as they used to say, was getting a little bit lack. It wasn't that glamour a few years ago, but yes. You feel things have changed. There's a new CIO role that is emerging as compared to someone doing CIO role in the past. How it's changing in the last, how it has changed in the last decade or so?
Yeah, so I think right now, I wrote an article about this a while back, but essentially we're kind of in this CIO renaissance era, right? So what's really exciting is there's a rise of this dual role CIO, the citizenship, right? So you have emerging responsibilities about technology, customer relationship, customer experience, and then we're creating new opportunities for the enterprise, right? So when you're leveraging technology in new and innovative ways, the CIO actually is creating better user experiences, improving partnerships, and actually delivering services in real time that should proactively meet and address customer needs. Where, in the past, a lot of times, what folks were telling me is that the CIO role was starting to stand for a career is over, right? They were getting, to the point of their career where they were like, we're not doing anything, we're not innovating, we're not essentially pushing anything. They're going from
they were just running the infrastructure of the company.
Exactly.
Not innovating, not doing anything.
Yeah. So I think the roles changed rapidly. Part of that's because technology is at the epicenter of every company now. And I think every company, no matter where they're at, is turning into, if they're not already, a technology company. And they're delivering their whatever product it is, fill in the blank, through some kind of technology platform, most likely as a service. And then they're doing this in a way that's scalable. So that way, as they grow, they have the functionality and availability to actually use boundary technologies, because the cost of using technology has become so low because it's been commoditized that almost anybody now can use the same technology that used to be a competitive advantage, say 2 decades ago.
And we'll come to that how recent emergence of various technologies like blockchain, AI, machine learning, and all that, or edge computing has really transformed the role of a CIO in an organization. We'll come to that. Before coming to that, I was again reading some of your bio, and you have managed a large team across multiple countries or maybe continents. And so tell us more about that. I mean, so a lot of our customers, they struggle with managing teams, onshore, offshore teams, and different teams. So I want to know more about your experience, your advice, your tips around managing such a large team and how it works.
Yeah, so I think the technology part's normally the easiest part of delivering services, globally. I think one of the biggest things that we worked on really hard when we started scaling up the business was that it's going to be different in every country you're spanning, right? So my last role, we were spanning 170 countries, communicating 180 different languages, and we were essentially disrupting many different verticals in this industry that we were in. And it was difficult because every language has different nuances, every culture has different nuances, every country has different regulations and different compliances. So you're essentially running 180 different businesses at the end of the day. The governance perspective, the perspective you have for cybersecurity, all these things are changing geographically. But what happens when you start to get to a certain level, you start to get network effect economies of scale. So what you can do is you can build off your fundamentals. So what I tell a lot of folks that are like, okay, I need to scale to X, Y, and Z. So first thing is get the fundamentals in place. Get your culture, get your people, get the playbooks that you need to scale, all really well defined. Because once you start scaling rapidly, I think we're growing at roughly 300% in the last organization I was with, it's very difficult to go back and hit pause and then fix things. Mm-hmm. So
what you're saying that it's important to set the culture upfront, set some of these norms upfront before scaling, rather than deal with them as the problem comes in. I mean, you're saying that it's important to set this up right up front, correct?
Exactly. And a lot of folks will ask me, so how much time should I spend on culture? I say, whatever you're thinking you should spend, do that 10x that, right? If you're going to spend,
And what is culture for you, Ryan? What is culture for you? I mean.
Yeah. So culture for me it's everything at the end of the day, right? That's why you want to work at a company. It's the culture, it's the feel, it's how you treat your employees. But at the end of the day, it's the mission. So it's getting behind a single mission that you're establishing for the organization. So a lot of people think culture is free lunches and, swag and all this stuff you're getting in all these companies. Like, yeah, that could be part of the culture to a certain extent. And I think the startup world's made that a big part of the culture. But when it comes down to it, when you look at companies and you survey what they want from their employees and what employees want from them, even more importantly, is they want to have a say in the organization. They want autonomy to be able to do what they need to do. And they also want to be able to have a feeling that whatever they're doing has a bigger impact on the world. So it's the 1 + 1 = 3 mentality. So what we tried to do when we set a culture is we sit down and we said, how can we establish a mission statement that's going to drive every, employee we have and every partner we're partnering with? But in addition to that, how can we do that where we're thinking 10 years from now as we're scaling the business to different countries? So then we started doing research on what is each country value? What is each, how do we do this in a way that we can actually scale this from a global perspective too? Because there's certain things, around regulations around work time, and, you look at Canada, you look at all the different areas, you have to be very specific around how many hours you can work and so you have to think about all these things in advance, make a roadmap and a game plan. Because when you hit these certain roadblocks or milestones, you need to turn on different, essentially chapters of your playbook, but the book needs to be written, in my opinion, in advance. And then where you're going. So that way you can articulate to the team. I think the biggest thing about culture, in my opinion, is communicating to your team what's going on in advance. So you can get a mission and you can get a passion behind whatever that essentially mission is or whatever that output needs to be to gain influence within the organization.
So it's very, sometimes it's become easier for product organization or rapidly growing startups to set up a mission. They want to change the world with this particular product. I mean, right. But there's a large set of organizations that are essentially consulting in nature, or agencies, yep. Or, how would they set up a mission? At the end of the day, they're providing service. Yep. You have any advice for them or something?
Yeah. So, I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to a few things, in my opinion, right? This is just my personal opinion. It would be sustainability. Folks want to be sustainable to not only the environment, but to the world. So it's coming around. What are you doing from a service organization? You're traveling a ton. You're doing all these carbon footprint activities, right? So focus on those things that your team feels passionate about and the organization feels passionate about. Make rules and, for lack of better words, I don't want to say regulations, but make people feel like they're making a difference in the world, no matter what they're doing in the organization, service level, product level, whatever it is, right? The second thing is get input from the team. So what you think is a culture that's working well may not be what your team or your overall enterprise believes is actually a well-functioning culture. So I think it's having an open mind, and maybe it's the trust but verify mentality. So trust the team's doing the right things, verify they're doing the right things, but then set a culture or mission or whatever it is to then help those folks do the right things more easily. So
do you feel money trumps culture, or it doesn't?
I think culture trumps money, in my opinion, at all times. I mean, if you look at any startup world, people are taking huge pay cuts to go work at these companies, right? So yeah. So in my opinion, the culture rules the world. I think the new currency probably today is time, right? First, and then culture, right? People want to work on cool, fun, hard projects, in my opinion.
And that goes for millennials? I mean, do they really want to work on hard, cool projects?
They do, in my opinion, right? I think everybody at the end of the day does, right? No matter, which demographic you fit into, I think people want to work on cool, hard projects. They may not say they want to work on hard projects, but when, you get down to it and you start to actually work on these projects and you actually get some folks that, were maybe saying, I don't know if this is going to work, or I'm afraid to fail, right? It's like, we can fail, but let's fail together. You start to see them getting more inspired. You start to see folks getting more, excited about the overall statement and the mission. And then what happens, the culture becomes better because you still have that trust, and trust is just success over time. The more success you have over time, the higher the trust will be. And the higher the trust will be, in my opinion, the better the culture will get over time as well.
So once you establish a culture, how you select people to be part of that? Did you make, or do you make an active an effort to make sure that you get the right people in who gets aligned with this culture, or you get someone who's talented in and try to make sure that they fits well into the culture? I mean, what goes first? Get the right person?
I think EQ is going to trump IQ, right? So emotional intelligence, they need to be able to understand what's going on. What we found was interesting is that, in my last role, I think about 9% of the hires, 90, came from internal references. So when you get somebody that works for the company, that's passionate about the company, they want to bring folks with them, right? They get that come join me mentality. And what happens is when they get into the interview process, because my last role, I was spending probably almost 100% of my time doing, culture and hiring. And that's what was actually driving the company from a, technology perspective, is actually the people, right? And it was interesting because when I hired someone, or when I interviewed someone that was external, had no idea of the company, they would come in really well prepared, and they would tell me a lot of things that were impressive because they did a lot of research. It was great. When I hired someone that was from another reference in the company, they wouldn't necessarily have a lot of research they've done, but they came to me with the passion, and they knew what they wanted to do because the person explained to them, and they were so passionate about the role that they may not have even wanted the job, but they wanted to come join a company that was that passionate about something. So that's the first thing, is always look for someone that's more passionate about, whatever the mission statement is. And you can normally gauge that through, second and third level questionings, right? So you would kind of have that level set there. And then what would happen is when you're bringing them in for the culture fit, normally what I would say is come join us for a day, right? Come see what it's like to work here, right? I'm not going to hire you into an executive level position if you haven't actually sat down with our executives and see how, you mold with them. It's a two-way interview, right? We want to make sure you work well with us. We make sure we work with you, because at the end of the day, if we don't work well together, then, we're going to be hitting unnecessary bottlenecks that we just can't have when we're scaling. So I think that's kind of the first level. And then there's multiple levels beyond that. But I think for time's sake, that's probably going to be, maybe another call.
Thank you very much. And there must be, and this is good advice for the people who wants to run a company or want to join a company. There must be, while you were scaling that large organization, there must be teams or vendors you're working with. And because some of our audience could be just like agencies who want to work with a company like you, what you really look in a vendor or a company that you take on board to work with you? From a CIO perspective, who's running a large organization, what should a vendor have in their company so that you can really work with them?
Yeah, so I think it kind of comes down to a couple things, right? So the first thing is their mission, their objectives, their values, right? So a lot of this has become commoditized. So you have more ability to kind of pick and choose who you want to work with today, in my opinion. I'd say the second one is how does it link back to your business objectives, right? I think so often people want to say, how is this vendor doing X, Y, and Z for me? Well, that's fine, but you can get that from a lot of vendors. So how is that vendor, that partner, right? How are they essentially listing their objectives or values that keep in line with what you're doing? So at the end of the day, the slowest or weakest part of your company may be your vendor, but if that's not functioning the way you should be functioning, then it's going to slow you down as well too, because they need to have the same pace you have. And then the third thing I would say is putting that into context and understanding what are they doing from a technology perspective, what are they doing from a governance perspective. If they don't have the right governance and the right, for lack of better words, ability to execute globally, then you will not also be a proxy have the same ability to execute globally.
So in your experience, did you find smaller companies work well because they are nimble, they can change fast, they treat you with more respect because you're their large customer, or larger companies work well with you? Or it's a mixture of both.
Yeah, it's probably a mixture of both. I think a lot of folks will say, oh, if I'm a big company, all these small vendors want to work with me and I can kind of get what I need from them. It's like, yeah, you probably can, but I don't want to have that mentality or that relationship with the company. I want to be a partnership. And then you have a lot of big companies that will say, oh, I'm going to dictate what I do to smaller companies because from a vendor perspective, they need me, right? And they don't necessarily need them. And you don't want that relationship either. So I think it's got to be a two-way street. And in addition to that, I think it also has to be something where you're adding to their value chain, right? So it's upcycling whatever it is, and it's less recycling, it's upcycling, taking what you've done, open sourcing it, giving back to the community, whatever it is to help the next person coming up have an easier time to get into your position or whatever it is that you're looking to do. Maybe it's opening up your API connections, right? So that way these folks don't have to code out all these aspects that should just be simple plug and play, right? And we were doing that stuff really early on in 2008, 2007, before a lot of folks were opening up, different API connections and that kind of stuff, because we realized that's the value we can bring from both a vendor and a partner to other folks as well too.
You're operating more like a platform and then letting other people build on you and build for
you.
Right.
Exactly.
Right. Because partner has become a very commoditized word in its own right. Everybody say, I want to be a partner, not your vendor, not your customer. But at the end of the day, you really need to see a few things in a partner, in someone to make sure that they're really a partner and not something else. Okay, now that's good stuff. Coming to the present day situation, how and this coronavirus, it's spreading like everywhere, and cities are locked down, the businesses are putting everyone on remote. So, what's your take on it? How it's going to hit the business or probably the IT economy, and how should organizations prepare themselves for this?
Yeah, well, I think the number one thing is obviously this is similar to other financial crises we've had, in the past, 2008, right? And I think what it comes down to is that you need to be looking at CDC, looking at different levels of risk and advising, your staff kind of and your company, especially from a technology perspective, what are the things you can do to actually avoid as much risk as possible, right? So obviously looking at level 1, 2, and 3 CDC warnings and probably advising folks not to travel to different areas. There's factors that influence the risk, right? The density, where you're at, and the number of people you come in contact with. So of course it's trying to limit the amount of personal contact and doing more virtual, delivery, virtual services, virtual meetings. And then from a technology perspective, it's actually helping your company come up with these virtual solutions to be able to drive business. So that way you don't have any kind of lack of business. So it's that business continuity aspect. I don't think a lot of folks were, this hit early on in China, like December, right? And then a lot of things happened since then. So some companies were taking a lot of proactive steps, November, December, and you look at companies that were doing business in China, they obviously took a bigger stance more quickly because they saw what was happening. It was affecting them more quickly, right? So supply chain, these kind of folks, automobiles, people that were getting parts in and out of China, that was, I'd say, earlier adopters of these policies and procedures, right? Then there's slower adopters, and there's still some folks that aren't even, organizations that haven't even said you're going to be working from home. They're still working, in a, physical environment, right? So I think
you feel, are the organizations ready to work from home? You have worked for larger companies. Looking at such companies, how much of these largest companies, in your opinion, are really ready to do all the remote workforce kind of a thing? I mean, do they typically think that's a kind of thing that IT companies or tech companies typically do? But looking at large traditional companies, you feel they are ready to do all this work from home kind of stuff? There is enough digital transformation in these companies that has gone into that they can really do that?
No, I don't think a lot of companies are probably 100% ready, right? And I don't know any company that's going to say, I'm 100% ready to do this. But I think there's some simple things you can put in place that will help you no matter where you're at in the organization or where you're at in the technology stack. So I think I was reading a bunch of different articles on this, doing a bunch of different research months ago, right? And now I think it's much more publicly available of what's going on. But we put a couple of things in place, and this is probably from multiple different sources. So this isn't something I created, but this is stuff that we kind of collated together. So I'd say the first thing was we put together a 60-second rule, which is essentially saying if you engage in a group to solve a problem, right, do something in the first 60 seconds to help them experience it or exercise it. And essentially, if you're having a remote, communication or a remote meeting, make sure everybody has their own webcam on. Even if you're, in a room virtually in the same office, because some people are still going to offices, but they're not having meetings together. So even if you're in the same office, make sure in your different rooms you're in, have your webcam on and don't, do face-to-face communication as much as possible, because that helps the interaction and it helps also making sure that you have the right level of, I would say, kind of engagement as well too, right? The second thing is the responsibility rule. I think it's really easy when you're in virtual meetings to kind of not have the same list of outputs, or maybe like, here's the agenda items we're going to have for next meeting, because everyone says, all right, great, bye. And it's easy because when you're in a virtual meeting, normally it's back to back, right? And you jump off that meeting, you go to another virtual meeting, where before you're walking around with the same group of people normally to the next meeting, at least for a partial part of the journey, right? And you're still talking, communicating about that. Now your mind has to move so quickly from one meeting to the next, right? So right for our call, I was in another meeting virtually. We were using different platform. We weren't using Zoom. And essentially it's like, I got to reconnect to this platform, change this. So my last meeting ended at the exact same time ours started, but then I had to go in and actually get the Zoom meeting set up and everything else. So I think it's being a little bit more understanding too, right? When folks are maybe late to meetings, because I think in a lot of cultures are saying, don't be late to meetings, always be on time. It's like, well, that's fine. But if you're doing multiple meetings of the day, there's so many different video conferencing technologies out there that you may be jumping back and forth. I think yesterday I used 7 different technologies to take.
And no wonder their stock is jumping. Their stock is going through the roof. I mean, everybody is going virtual these days. Yeah.
Yes, so, exactly.
So if you're in virtual tech business, I think it's an opportunity for them.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of businesses, they're already kind of delivering a lot of stuff virtually anyways. So now they're at advantage because they've already prepped and kind of put the hours in and the investment in to actually scale what they have now as well too.
But do you subscribe to that doomsday scenario that the economy is going to slow down big time with this coronavirus and it's eventually having a cascading effect on everything? So do you subscribe to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you subscribe to it or not, unfortunately, look at the stock market. I mean, it's already dictating what's happening, right? And I think what happens is
that's partially because of oil as well, I guess.
Yes. But if you look at oil, I mean, oil was already going down before this, right? So this just happened to be something that was another instance into that as well too, right? So oil was dropping, since, I don't know, maybe like 3 months before even the coronavirus started, I would say, right? Then this just added to that level as well too, right? So it created an unnecessary complexity in addition to that, right? So I think the stock market is reacting to that, but you're also getting the self-fulfilling prophecy where everyone now is maybe over worried now because the stock market is, dropping. So then they react even more than they would if the stock market was kind of staying where it's at. But yeah, to answer the question, I do think this is going to have a ripple effect throughout the entire economy.
But do you feel that because of all the social media and the spread of this digital connectivity, it has added to probably creating this fear of virus than it actually should be? I mean, if you had been doing it for like 20 years ago, people were not so connected, and I mean, it could have been contained. I mean, it could not have been contained, but still, there was not so much panic. You feel that we are so connected these days that the panic spreads so quickly?
I think the panic spread so quick. I think also there's more technology to track what's going on as well too. So if you look at like Johns Hopkins University, right? They have a whole system that will tell you exactly how many outbreaks there are. They'll tell you how many are infected, how many have unfortunately have died from the incident. So I think we have more data at our fingers than ever we've ever had, in the past.
Correct.
And what's happening is with that data, you can make that data say or do whatever you like the data to do, right? So depending on the data source you're looking at, that's going to be different than what's happening, in different areas. So I think it's understanding how that data affects you, first of all. So consume the data and then contextualize that data and then articulate that data to your teams. Because otherwise, if you don't articulate data correctly, everyone's going to essentially consume that data however they want to. And that may or may not be accurate to what's actually going on. So I think that's the first step, is actually getting ahead of what's going on and then communicating to your team with what's happening. I think that's true with any kind of incident, right? Second thing is, because there's so much data out there now, I think it's hard not to look at the stats on like an hourly basis or, daily basis at least. So I think that's the other thing that's happening too, is people are getting over fixated on the stats, what's happening.
There's an overload of information as well, I guess.
Correct. Yep.
Right.
So I think all that combined is definitely adding some uncertainty into what's going on.
Right. Okay. So that's for the present. Moving on to the future. So there's a lot of tech that has started to mature in the last few years or last 5 to 10 years, like blockchain, machine learning, deep learning, AI. And all that. How do you see as a CIO the future of these techs? What are your top picks, and how you see the future of technology 5 years from now or 10 years from now?
Yeah, so I think first thing is, what I'm seeing is a lot of people trying to jump on the bandwagon because they see something that looks or feels cool, and they want to be looking or feeling cool as well too with everybody else, because a lot of their peers are saying you need to be doing this. So I think to start, what's happening is, with the same thing we just talked about with the data being more prevalent than ever, boards and C-suites have more data at their fingertips than ever as well too. And they're seeing what other companies are doing very similar to this via social media and everything else. And they're saying, this is cool. Why aren't we doing this? And what's happening
Fear of missing out. Fear of missing out.
The FOMO, right? So what's happening is people are saying, we need to do this because X, Y, and Z has done this. And they're forgetting to actually go through the very simple business use case for realization, ROI, total cost of ownership, and what this means long term. Great example,
I saw that happen a lot in the blockchain stuff. As compared to AI machine learning. So in blockchain, everyone was trying to do something on a blockchain, even if the use case permits that or not. I just want to hear your views on that, because you wrote a few things on blockchain.
Yes. So I think blockchain was very interesting. You had companies rebrand themselves to put something, blockchain in their name, and their stock was going up by orders of magnitude. And it was a very, for lack of better words, there's a hype cycle around this, right? And there's a lot of buzzwords going on. And I think the biggest thing that was happening is that people didn't understand what blockchain was. They didn't know what distributed ledger technology was. They didn't know how consensus worked. They didn't know what the problem they were solving. They just knew that it was cool and it was something they wanted to be doing because the rest of the world was doing it. So to your point, I think blockchain is a great example of this, because if you look at all the different projects that were happening 2 years ago, even 12 months ago, I would say, based on looking at them, I haven't done this recently because I don't have time I used to have to do this, but there was like a 90% failure rate, right? So they would launch something, they would get it into production, and then they realized too late, it wasn't doing what they thought it was going to be doing, because they weren't able to actually understand the business use case well enough, and they were using technology to try to solve a problem.
They were just doing it for the sake of technology, not for the sake of business, or not, neither the business warrants that use of that technology, I guess.
Exactly. So I started going around, and I think in 2008, 2009, and chatting with other companies, mostly large enterprises, about what blockchain was, what they could do with blockchain, what they should not be doing with blockchain, and the use cases to use blockchain, right? And then the use cases to say, this is absolutely not a blockchain project, right? We should be using a simple database to solve this. Right. I think that helped a lot of folks that were in my network, right? But then there's a lot of other folks, obviously, that were not in my network, and they were doing all these things outside of different areas. So I think what we're going to see is a full circle here, where it's just like the whole distributed, undistributed database. There's these cycles, right, where everybody goes relational, non-relational, and it's like it just keeps repeating every certain cadence.
Or from a mainframe model to a desktop model, back to cloud model and whatnot.
Right? Exactly. So I think what it comes down to is there's always going to be a reason to do something. So what I challenge my team with is, if we don't need a reason to do it, what's the cost or risk of doing nothing, first of all? Second, if we do something, how's it going to drive the user experience? How's it going to drive our business? And what is it going to do from a CapEx or OpEx perspective? Because at the end of the day, it's much easier. And like coronavirus right now, COVID-19, like you can easily have a better restriction on CapEx spend. So if you're worried about your organization, you can decrease CapEx relatively easy. OpEx, if you have a certain amount of operational expenditure that's in AWS or GCP or wherever it's at, you're going to be using that regardless of whatever, I know it's a consumption model, but it's really not a consumption model. And unfortunately, with data that's happening right now, a lot of companies are getting more consumption, which means the cost is rising, but they're not getting any business value from it because folks are going to their website to check things, not to buy things. So every interaction costs money. Right. So their conversion rate has gone down. And if they were doing this on a capital expenditure, they could actually turn off services to actually mitigate some of this risk, or the services were already purchased, right? And then they could slow down the future spend, right? So
I think, you've put in a very important point into perspective that you just shouldn't be just using technology for the sake of technology, but I mean, there needs to be a business use case, and there needs to be someone who can work through the business use case and really can pinpoint that, yes, this is a technology, this is a business use case that we need, and this is a technology that can really solve it. I mean, we have at our company a whole practice of AI machine learning. And the very first thing that we talk with the customers is really that, we try to understand their problem and most of the time educate them that this is really not a machine learning problem. I mean, you can you can solve it probably through other means. And this is where you need to be putting in your money. And at the end of the day, there's no guarantee that what you'll get out of even a machine learning project is what you're looking for. So I mean, you need to really think about the business case. I was really surprised so we had a blockchain team as well when a friend of mine told me that in Dubai, in UAE, the government has put, I may be wrong at it, but I just heard this, that they put on all government organizational that kind of thing that 3% of their budget or something needs to go into the blockchain. And I said, okay, now do you have the use case to do that? No, we have this use case that can be done with a server and a database, but now we are doing it with a blockchain and so on and so forth. So yes, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think to that point, you look at these countries, like Malta and those other ones that are essentially now blockchain hubs, right? I think this is what's happening is you have these countries, these, whatever it is, these geographic locations that have kind of embraced this as we're the safe zone for this and we're going to be innovating in the space, which is great, right? But it's like, what are we doing to solve, what problem are we trying to solve here? I think back to machine learning AI problem you were talking about earlier, you have a lot of companies that are doing RPA, right? And they're like, oh yeah, we're doing machine learning, we're doing AI. It's like, you're really not, right? And then you have natural language, non-natural language, and there's always the different, I would say nuances to these different areas. So like, if somebody wants to do machine learning, like if you want to do it just to do it, we can help you do it very easily. Just spin up GCP, Google Cloud Platform, turn on some machine learning services, and now you're doing machine learning. But if you really want to do machine learning, right, and you want to solve problems, data lake, data swamp, or all these things that are going on to actually have bigger data instances that you want to spin up, then let's solve that problem. So I think the first conversation for a CIO is the chief integration officer now, right? So they went from career is over to chief integration officer of integrating all these different, platforms and services. And then their role, in my opinion, for the CIO should be, you want to do this? Okay, what's the lowest cost way for us to do this? If you want to say you're doing machine learning just to say we're doing it, good, let's do it. Let's spin up one thing though. It's going to cost us a nominal amount of money that we will forget about. And then the conversation's over. I think some CIOs, they get too fixated on this battle between we don't need to do this or we need to do that. Sometimes it makes sense just to say, let's try it. Let's give it a go. What's the...
I mean, you can spare a bit of innovation budget, can use it intelligently to do some proof of concepts to see if you get a hang of it and if the organization is ready for it and if there's a large business case for that. I mean, we do it all the time with organizations, talking to them and figuring them out that do they really need that? We do blockchain, we do machine learning and a lot of other stuff. But yeah, organization needs to be ready for that. I mean, they need to have data for that. They need to have the right processes for that. And there needs to be a buy-in at a larger scale that what really needs to. So that's good stuff. So, I mean, I think machine learning, AI, and edge computing together, they'll form some great stuff, and they can solve a lot of problems, but only if we use them intelligently. And to
I think edge computing is something that more companies are taking on now because there actually is a bigger use case to edge computing that fixes more problems, solves more things. I mean, edge computing is great because it reduces network hops, latency, bandwidth constraints, all these different things that are real problems for a lot of organizations that are trying to solve, like SD-WAN, those kind of areas. So I think, again, it comes down to what are you trying to solve? What are you trying to do? And the point I made about spinning up something Google Cloud platforms, because 9 times out of 10, when you spin that up, you realize it didn't work. And then that saves you a ton of time, energy, and money than even having the conversation long-term of how are we going to do this? Because in my opinion, if you're going to launch an AI, machine learning, edge, whatever it is, you need to have at least a runway of probably, like, realistically 2 to 6 years.
Absolutely.
Get rolled out, tested, configured.
Yeah, it's really not a product that you can spend like 6 months down the road. It's really a journey. You have to create an organization, make an organization ready for that.
Exactly.
And these large organizations, they are now very comfortable with the concept of center of excellence and all that. But I mean, they need to think of AI, machine learning, and all that technology in a similar vein and start somewhere small, create an organization ready for that, and then adopt this. I think this is the right approach. So I think that takes us towards the end of our session today. I mean, we talked about your role as a CIO. We talked about how the CIOs should work in a modern day. We also talked about something about this coronavirus, the present and the future of tech. Anything that you want to add over here, Ryan, before we finish off and let this and publish it for our audience?
No, I just want to say thanks so much for the time. I appreciate it. I think it was a lot of fun. We need to do it again soon because this is constantly changing and evolving. And I think if we had the same conversation tomorrow, it'd probably be even different than today. So as things expand and change, that's the fun of the role of a CIO, is that it's never constant and it's constantly evolving. I think the folks that are becoming CIOs or they want to be CIOs, just know that that's the role you're going into, is a never-ending, constantly evolving role. That's a lot of fun, but it's also something that, at the end of the day, you're driving some of the most crucial parts of the business. So be prepared to have that, weight on your shoulders as you go into these roles.
Thank you for being my guest over here. You have really added some wonderful stuff to our knowledge.
Sounds good. Have a great day.
Thank you once again, Ryan and Umair, for being with us today and offering insights around the growing role of CIOs in defining a company's digital strategy. Thanks for listening to this episode by BetterTech. If you enjoyed this podcast, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to share it across your favorite social networking platform. We look forward to bringing you the latest industry news in our next episode. In the meantime, take a look at our other episodes and hit subscribe with the links in the description box below so that you don't miss out on the latest in tech.